changes in exploration, Chadley, breeding chocobos, Wutai's role in Remake Part 3, and some of the big moments you guys have been waiting for. These are all things I asked for your guys' input on, and we're going to break those down in today's video. So welcome back to this installment of community comments. This is part 2. If you missed part 1, I'll leave a link in the upper right hand corner of this video, as well as in the description if you'd like to check that out. We covered Tifa versus Scarlet, Vincent's transformations, and some of the combat overhauls you guys wanted to see in Remake Part 3, including some changing of how earrings worked. But for today's video, we talk about changes in exploration and terrain coming to us from Silvertooth86, who says, "My biggest want would be for the world to start as we know it from Rebirth, but once Meteor is called, the terrain of every zone we've already visited goes through a complete overhaul as a corrupted live stream breaks through. It destroys the towers, completely changes every area's layout, and opens new zones requiring multi-skilled chocobos, providing a plot reason for chocobo breeding. Now you need a single chocobo who can climb walls and jet over water to reach hidden locations. The data space required for this would be insane, unless we're on a linear path without revisiting the areas from Rebirth pre-Meteor. But it would be my #1 desire. Give me legitimate story reasons to revisit areas and have a completely different experience. With Chadley's potential disappearance, the original summons are all awakened and can now be encountered in the wild." They do continue by saying it'd be kind of interesting to have the Knights of the Round technically be replaced by all of our summons, minus Bahamut, and the reason they gave is because it kind of seems like maybe Bahamut sided with Jenova because of what happened in Advent Children with Bahamut Sin in the town of Edge and how things got really crazy. But for me, I don't view Bahamut or any summon as inherently good or evil. They're essentially obeying whoever is summoning them, which is why Bahamut Sin, even though that's a very scary name, destroyed parts of Edge. It's because Kadaj was the one summoning him and wanting him to do his bidding. Kind of like how, spoiler alert, in Final Fantasy IX, we see Queen Braun and Kuja utilizing different summons to destroy entire towns and villages. I don't think those summons were bad, they were just doing what they were ordered. But going back to the first part of that comment, it would be super cool if once Meteor is summoned, a lot of the world does end up changing, and I think it will. I don't know if it'll go as far as like a Final Fantasy VI where you have the world of ruin, but I do expect locations to look different, NPCs to offer different side quests and conversations, and if they can, like Silvertooth says, change up some of the terrain and add bonus areas. Again, the idea of incorporating chocobo breeding to get you to these new bonus spots is really cool. It would also be incentive to eventually get the gold chocobo. Now it's not just about getting the Knights of the Round, you need that gold chocobo to make exploration and getting to all of these new areas that much easier. And again, I think they will do that. I don't think we'll just have the same versions of the towns that we had in Rebirth. Obviously, things will have to change once Meteor gets summoned and things are going to get really, really hairy. And going back and just seeing everyone again for the last time, maybe recruiting some of our older chocobos, I think would fit the story that they're going to tell, especially since it's the end of the trilogy. To that last part, I've been screaming at the top of my lungs in these videos for years. I hope in part 3 that we get real, actual legitimate summons, not just the artificial ones that we've been given by Chadley in Remake and Rebirth. And if Chadley does again disappear, we're not going to have anyone to make materia or summons for us. So what do? My idea is you take a mechanic that was implemented in Rebirth and you now repurpose it. What am I talking about? The summon shrines. So in Rebirth, you'd find a rock, you'd bust that sucker open, an energy light would come out and lead you to another rock, which led you to another rock, which eventually led you to the shrine, where you could go in and make your summon stronger. And I thought that was super cool because it gave a reason for that summon to be in the area that it was in. It had lore, what it meant to the people, what it meant to the world, how it shaped the terrain around it. I thought all of that was a brilliant, brilliant way to handle summons and actually incorporate them into the world instead of them just being summons that are super cool and powerful. But for part 3, what do? You keep the summon shrines, but now they are summon dungeons. And you're not just gonna bust open a rock to find one, you're gonna have to do a little bit of detective work to find these dungeons. You find a dungeon, you go in, you battle your way to the end of the dungeon to find materia. But the summons aren't just gonna join you, you gotta prove your worth to them. So then you gotta do a boss fight to earn the trust of that summon. Which kind of contradicts what I said earlier about summons not being inherently good or evil, but we're talking about gameplay mechanics here, people. But you fight the summon and you earn them, and now you're using a real life legitimate summon, not an artificially made one. I want to interact with the real things, people. Let me get the real summons. And as far as exploration goes, this kind of goes hand in hand with a comment that we covered in the previous video where someone was saying that they didn't like that the Remake trilogy didn't have an old school world map. They wanted these games to have a map akin to what we got in Clair Obscur. And my answer to that was the map that we got in Clair Obscur worked perfectly for that game because it was a smaller scale scoped game that was meant to be an homage to the PlayStation 1 era of JRPGs. So having that kind of world map really fit that game. For the Remake trilogy, because it is a much bigger in scale and scope game, having this massive open world and exploring it the way we're doing it really does make sense. But where I agree with that previous user is how exploration is done. Clair Obscur does exploration in a really, really brilliant way. You have a map, but things on that map aren't labeled until you actually find it. You don't even have a compass to direct you in the right direction. You just run around, find enemies, find new locations, go exploring. It's very well done. And some of those locations aren't too expansive. Sometimes it's a small area where you get a record, or it's just like a small little cave, but it's still pretty cool how they do it. And I do think that that's how exploration will be in Remake Part 3. Again, this has really been a build-up, starting with Remake being super linear and confined to Midgar. Rebirth takes you out more into the open field, but it gives you towers and it kind of holds your hand to figure out how to actually navigate this world. But in Part 3, again, if we don't have Chadley, we're not going to have that map that we had in Rebirth where everything is labeled and it tells us where to go. And I do think that it will be spontaneous and organic when it comes to exploration in Part 3 because the devs have already hinted at that. Shortly after Rebirth came out, the devs did an interview with Anime News Network where they addressed some of the criticisms people had of exploration and even combat, and they just said straight up that they want players to have way more freedom in Part 3, not just with the combat, but in terms of exploration. They want things to be missable. They want it to be spontaneous and organic. So I really truly think in Part 3, we won't have a Chadley to guide us. We're just going to be running around finding things on our own, which I think could be incredibly fun, especially since we'll have the high wind, which will make traveling so much easier and discovering new areas that much easier. And again, the devs have been really good about listening to genuine criticisms people have of gameplay mechanics for these games. And I do think in Part 3, we will have that exploration that I think a lot of people really want, which is just freedom. Pick a direction, head in that direction. Oh, what's that? I found a dungeon and there's a summon in it, maybe with a bonus weapon. Sick. Sign me up. Up next, we have Just Kiki 2440 or Just K Key 2440 or Just Kiki, depending on your level of literacy. They go on to write, Genova prequel DLC would be fun. Earn trust, then take over the Gi and Cetra like The Thing. Sephiroth learning about his true past. Finally, I just want a good ending all can enjoy that ties all of this stuff in and makes sense. Oh, and snowboarding. So I do think they're going to go heavier into the Gi in Part 3. We got a pretty decent amount of info in Rebirth in regards to the Cetra and how they weren't always what people thought they were, specifically from the viewpoint of the Gi. And we got some teases of the Gi with Gina talk and what their motivation is and wanting to get the black materia to essentially what we know we're under the belief of is essentially not exist anymore, which would mean destroying the entire planet because they cannot return to the planet because they're not from it. So the Gi, the Cetra all have way more prominent roles this time around. And I think that when we get more backstory on Sephiroth, we will inevitably get more backstory on them, but also Genova. And again, the stuff they're doing in Ever Crisis, really fleshing this stuff out, is very well done and it's legitimately interesting. And I do think, some people have worries of, well, I don't want to play Ever Crisis. I just want to know what I need to know. And I think they'll do that. In Part 3, they'll just take all of the important bits of Ever Crisis and put them in Remake Part 3, maybe as like a Spark Notes version, or just kind of sprinkle them throughout the game so people can understand what's going on with Sephiroth, what's his motivation, and on what's inevitably going to happen. But to get a little bit more detail into how exactly Jenova operated and moved, and to see that in action could be super cool, especially from the perspective of the Gi. It could be something truly, truly terrifying. And I do have hope and faith that they will nail the landing of this trilogy. Again, everyone involved really seems to know how important it is to nail the landing, how important these characters and this world are to so many people. And just based on the writing they've done so far, Nojima doesn't have me worried. He's really kind of addressed a lot of those criticisms I think people had specifically of the compilation, and really making sure that they get it right this time. And I don't think the ending will be super, super happy, but I don't think it will be super dark and depressing either. I think it's going to be the right blend that is satisfying, that lets the characters breathe and be happy, but those that we lost, while they're gone, they're still kind of around in a way. And of course, snowboarding. Instead of just snowboarding minigame, let us use a snowboard a la a chocobo. So when we're in the Icicle Inn area, maybe Cloud's got to do some sick SSX jumps to get to a specific dungeon. Make it happen, Square. Up next, we have Dream Phoenix, who's talking about utilizing AI in Final Fantasy games. They go on to say, it will be very interesting to see how AI is utilized in the production of Part 3, considering the number of AI-related patents Square Enix is filing. Semi-autonomous NPCs, skin meshes over functional musculoskeletal systems, an Unreal Engine machine learning model Witcher 4 demoed, the Queen's Blood version of Deep Blue / AlphaGo, etc. So I'm not too well versed with these things in particular, but just to kind of get my viewpoints of AI out there, I cannot stand the generative stuff. I don't fuck with that. I don't fuck with ChatGPT or any of those chatbots. I think a lot of those things can be super dangerous because they just tell you what you want to hear. And if I'm not mistaken, there was an individual who was using ChatGPT and they ended up taking their own life, which is awful. And look, I get it. There might be some positive applications to a ChatGPT. I've seen some people throw in some numbers and how much they weigh and their height, and they get a workout plan that works for them, and they end up losing a lot of weight and getting healthy. So there's that. But still, with this stuff, I really feel like it's a slippery slope, and you got to be really, really careful with how you engage with it because it can lead to some really bad stuff. And when it comes to the generative stuff, you've got all of these really greedy corporate billionaires and millionaires who want to utilize that stuff to steal stuff from other creators or eventually replace their workers because it saves them money. You're a billionaire. How much more money do you really need to hoard to run your company the way you want to? It's super messed up. But the AI that I'm okay with, because let's be honest, AI is here and it's here to stay, so we got to get used to some aspect of it. But if AI, again, can be used as a tool to assist people in their everyday jobs, I'm more for that. So if you can have tools that assist Square and make development a little bit easier and smoother, I'm all for that. They've done it already when it comes to the lip syncing and Remake and Rebirth. They then have developers go in and just kind of clean up those animations to make sure that the mouth movements are done properly. But I'd have to do some more research into what these things are in terms of like maybe graphics and how it might make it easier to develop character models and make them look more realistic. Again, if it's more of an assist type of thing, I'm totally cool with that. Up next, we have Leyland Wells, who talks about some concerns about the ending of this game by saying, I'm concerned about Part 3 ending up like Kingdom Hearts 3. It feels like Nomura likes writing stories about characters being separated. In KH3, after years of waiting, it fell flat and didn't deliver on expectations. I'm hoping 7-3 has a bigger payoff. Think about it, we've only got to use Zack twice so far going into this final chapter. What exactly are we remaking if everything ends the same? Well, Leyland, I have some good news for you. Nomura's not writing this trilogy. Nomura served as the game's main director for Remake, and he's still involved in the project. I forget what his exact title is. I think it's like creative lead or something like that. So he's still involved, but he is not the writer of this trilogy. That goes to Kazushige Nojima, who wrote the original FF7 and many of its spin-offs and compilation material. And Nojima is somebody who I've mentioned in past videos seems incredibly introspective. He's very self-critical. He's very well aware of some of the criticisms people had of the original FF7 and even some of his own criticisms that he wanted to address in the Remake trilogy. And I think he's been doing a really great job so far. of addressing those criticisms, specifically with the relationship of Tifa and Aerith, how in the original kind of felt like maybe they didn't quite like each other. But in this game, you really see how close their friendship is with one another and how much they actually care for one another. They confide in each other. There are things that they don't even tell Cloud and Barrett that they just keep between themselves. And when it comes to the game's ending, that will be a collaborative effort. The developers have mentioned that in previous videos by saying everyone kind of has their own piece of input on how they want to see the game play out and eventually end. So I think you will still get pieces from all of the developers in that ending, but it ultimately comes down to what Nojima thinks is going to be best for this trilogy. And as far as minimal use of Zack, you got to remember, we are only halfway through this story, so there's still an entire game left for us to utilize Zack in terms of combat, in terms of story stuff. So I'm sure there's still a ton that they have up their sleeve that we will eventually see when Part 3 starts getting promoted. So I wouldn't worry about it ending up like Kingdom Hearts. Up next, we move into Wutai territory and how big of a role that could play in this trilogy. This comes to us from Lone White Mage, who says, I'm hoping that Wutai will be a big central location for Part 3, given how they've built up the war between Shinra and Wutai picking back up. Plus, there's a ton of stuff they can go into, like Yuffie's backstory, obviously, the interim government and Viceroy Saruf plot, maybe even stuff like what they've shown of Wutai in Ever Crisis. And I'm also hoping that Zengan is there, and that Tifa will meet back up with him. Yeah, Wutai is going to be massive in Part 3. If I remember correctly, Nomura himself said in an interview a while ago that the scale of Wutai is going to be really, really big. It's its own nation. And it's going to be interesting to see how it's portrayed in Remake Part 3. I could envision it as being almost like this big touristy kind of location that maybe has lost some of its uniqueness and culture over the years. And maybe Yuffie returning there and hashing things out with her family could maybe kind of change the course of where Wutai is going. But obviously, the biggest thing is that war. We don't know what point in that story that war between Wutai and Shinra is going to actually play out. I imagine Shinra will show up in Wutai to have this massive war and it'll go back and forth. But Wutai isn't just important in the Remake trilogy. They've done a lot of stuff with Wutai in Ever Crisis, specifically in the first Soldier story with Sephiroth. Looking at where that story is, Sephiroth and his group are currently in Wutai. He's hunting down the Masamune. There's a ton of lore on the land of Wutai and how it came to be. You had this group of heroes show up to defeat this massive monster, but in doing so, they ended up torching the land around it, which forced people to migrate in an area that would eventually become Wutai. So I imagine when we get to Wutai, there's going to be a ton of stuff to do there, not just in the main story, but also when it comes to side quests. Now, as for Zengan, I do think they will have a specific side quest for Tifa where she's able to track him down, meet up with him, and learn like one final lesson from him before they go on to fight Sephiroth. I believe it was the new threat mod for OG FF7 on PC, which did have a specific side quest for Tifa in Zengan where she could find him, she could fight him. It was like one final test from him to make sure that she was ready to do what she needed to do. So I imagine whether it's in Wutai or where else, he will eventually show up, and I think we'll probably have a really cool send-off for that character in Tifa in a form of a really cool side quest. Up next, we have WSUDJ Cougar, who talks about the group reuniting on the Highwind. He writes, I want to see the post-livestream scene on the Highwind where Cloud and Tifa come back and he explains to everyone what he went through and then rallies everyone for the Northern Crater. That's going to be a really big moment. There's going to be a couple of really huge moments that I can't wait for in Part 3. There's obviously Cloud getting his mind back together and becoming the true version of himself. But this scene in particular where everyone has gone off, they've lived, one last day, they've contemplated whether or not this is a mission they want to go on. Cloud and Tifa head back to the Highwind, and one by one, everyone in that crew and in our party start to show up. That's going to be such a really big, emotional, powerful moment where for the first time, Cloud being Cloud gets to express who he truly is, how he truly feels, and what everyone means to him, which then rallies everyone together to go to the Northern Crater. And I'm hearing that music, the Highwind music playing in the background, hearing it swell as Cloud gives a speech to the crew and the party to motivate them. That's going to be so good. Cody Christian's going to kill it in Part 3. He's got so many big moments where I know he's just going to do a phenomenal job. He loves this character. He understands the character. And I think he's going to fully deliver in those specific moments. And those are going to be probably some of the standout sections in Part 3. Up next, we have Destin673 or Destine673. Please let me know in the comments how it's pronounced. They write, I'm hoping to see more emotional scenes between characters, especially with Yuffie and the rest, and we haven't been to Wutai yet. I wonder how they'll play that part up to Wutai, as Yuffie in this version isn't just some little kid, but a fighter who has experience in war or at least seen things. Will she steal the materia and hope to help her country like in the OG? Because this time she seems closer to the group than for herself. Same with Tifa, as she was far more emotional with Aerith's death than the rest, it seemed. They were very close, as if they were sisters, and I can't wait to see her reactions to Cloud's almost nonchalant attitude. I don't know, I'm very excited for more news. Yeah, part 3 I think is going to be filled again with those really big emotional scenes and a ton of character development. I also think when it comes to pacing, the story really is going to move at a pretty good pace compared to what we got in Remake and Rebirth, which was a criticism that I and many other people had, where it felt like a lot of the times they waited until the end of the game to really give you a lot of the bigger, juicier story stuff. But with part 3 being the last one, they have to find a way to properly disperse that out from beginning to end. But in regards to big character moments, I'm really just excited to get more Yuffie. I think that Suzy Young and Kazushige Nojima, and I'm forgetting the name of the Japanese actress, but she's wonderful too. They've all done such great jobs of making Yuffie feel like a real character that has layers. She's not just some sort of anime teen that's obnoxious and has no depth. There's a lot going on underneath the surface with a character like Yuffie. She's happy-go-lucky, but there's some dark stuff happening in her life, with her family, with her country. So seeing her go back to Wutai and seeing how different is it going to be for her to be in that home environment? How is she going to act with the party? Again, will Nero show up at some point? Will we see a ghost of Sonon? Because we didn't really see what happened with Sonon's body after Nero absorbed it. So he could very well use it as a puppet to freak Yuffie out, get her to doubt herself. That Shinra war could very well reach the shores of Wutai and take place there. So there's a lot that they can really do to flesh out Wutai and Yuffie, and again, just hearing more Suzy Young is not a bad thing. Everyone in that cast is phenomenal, but Suzy has done so much incredible work as Yuffie, and she's really creating a blossoming career as an actress and as a voice actor, and she was recently cast as the lead in Silent Hill F, and I'm really excited to play that game. And then they tell me, you know, Suzy's gonna be the lead. I'm all for it. I think she's gonna knock it out of the park. She's phenomenal. But I would expect Wutai to be a really, really big chunk of what Remake Part 3 is going to be. There's going to be a lot to do there in terms of side quests and battling enemies. There's the stuff that goes down with, you know, Don Corneo and the Turks and how Yuffie and Alina get kidnapped. So maybe they might turn that on its head a little bit. Because again, you know, we've talked about working side by side with NPCs before. You know, we're going to have to work with the Turks again. So maybe we'll get some more cool combat stuff. And imagine, it probably won't happen, but imagine doing a synergy team-up attack with the Turks. Cloud and Reno reluctantly doing a really cool move. Rude and Tifa banding together to do some really cool martial arts stuff. Forget tri-techs, can we get some quad-techs with these characters? Or whatever the equivalent of 5 would be. Give me a 5-tech. Let all 5 of these characters, the 3 in your party and the Turks, band together. Oh, Song's there, so they would be technically a hexagonal tech. You get what I'm saying. Go crazy, Teruki Endo. Let us do some cool stuff. I could see Yuffie still stealing materia. Oddly enough, she is close to the group, but at the end of the day, she has a really big mission of protecting her home and going back to her family. And if she feels that stealing that materia is still going to help, then that's going to be, you know, a choice she's going to have to make. What's the phrase people use? Ask for forgiveness, not permission. I think is what Yuffie might end up doing in that situation, because she's going to be really desperate and her family might come first. And also the opening hours of Remake Part 3 are going to be very interesting, specifically with Tifa and Cloud, because at the very end of that game, once everything is said and done, you've fought Sephiroth and Jenova, Tifa doesn't say a word. She has no dialogue from the end of that battle with Sephiroth until you see the end credits. She's in complete shock at what just happened with Aerith and Jenova, but also how Cloud is already acting like nothing is even wrong. She and Barrett share a couple of looks with one another of like, what is wrong with this guy? Like, we just lost somebody incredibly close to us and he's acting like nothing is wrong. She's incredibly, I think, shocked, but also kind of disappointed and maybe a little bit disgusted by Cloud's behavior. So seeing how their interaction is going to be in the opening hours of that game, I think it's going to be interesting. It could be kind of awkward. It could be really tense. Tifa might be a little short with Cloud in those moments, and I think it's going to eventually spread to the rest of the party when they start to realize, yeah, Cloud isn't acting quite right. What's going on? But also, speaking on really big character moments that could be emotional, I'm really excited to see what's going to happen when Vincent and Sephiroth meet again face to face. Will Vincent lash out and attack him? Will Sephiroth just kind of disregard him as this guy who couldn't do what he needed to do? It's going to be so incredibly tense, I think, when these two finally meet one another, as well as Hojo. Vincent and Hojo, I hope they flesh that out a little bit more, because I think in the OG, Vincent only says a couple of things to Hojo, but based on how they've been building up Hojo and Vincent and their backstories, I think there's going to be way more meat there when Vincent eventually meets not just Sephiroth, but Hojo. So I'm really excited to see how those emotional beats hit in the story, especially since, you know, Vincent and Hojo most likely won't meet again for the first time until we go back to Midgar, when things are all going crazy. All hell has broken loose. So there's going to be even more chaos, no pun intended, going on in that kind of situation. Up next, we have Matt Apple 3119, who says, I have but two dreams for Final Fantasy: the 13 trilogy finally released on modern consoles, and a remake of the flawed masterpiece that is Final Fantasy 15. I also hope the franchise abandons everything they did in 16. The game was not it. As for 13, it's kind of nuts that you can't play, at least I don't think you can't play, the entire trilogy on modern consoles. I do know that the PlayStation 4 and 5 don't even have backwards compatible versions of the first game. You can play Final Fantasy 13 on an Xbox Series X, and from what I hear, other than PC, that is like one of the best ways to experience that game now, because the Series X does a really good job of cleaning up the graphics, the UI, all of that stuff in the backwards compatible version. So it's almost kind of like a quasi remaster, not remaster. But I would assume at some point Square would want to put together either a remaster of 13 or just put out a remastered collection of the entire trilogy. They do tweet about it from time to time, which gets people's hopes up. They'll, you know, put out pictures of Lightning, talk about the 13 trilogy. And I do think that as time has gone on, people have gotten much more fonder of 13. I think oftentimes there's this cycle that happens when a new Final Fantasy comes out where people are incredibly critical of it, and you've got people who love it, and then you've got the people that hate it. And as time goes on, that starts to fade, and more people start to look back on it and kind of view it as, you know, maybe I was a little too harsh towards you. And I see that happening with Final Fantasy XIII. I see a lot more positivity surrounding that trilogy in the first game in particular these days than I did back when it came out. So I'd assume at some point they would release a trilogy. A remake or even a remaster of 15 would be lovely. The dream would be a remake of 15 that includes all of the cut content that they had planned, including all of the DLC episodes, put back into the game in their proper slots, but with the combat of the 7 Remake trilogy. Imagine it. It's pretty close. You can play as Noctis or Prompto or any one of the Chocobros. They all have their different abilities. And I think making the action feel snappier and more satisfying would be really nice. That is a game that I think would benefit from having a proper remaster or a remake, just because of how tumultuous its dev period actually was. Despite its issues, I love 15 to death. The Royal Edition in particular, phenomenal game. I love it. As for 16, I think 16 was a unique situation. I don't see the next Final Fantasy, the more I think about it, being another character action game, because it really depends on what the story is going to be. The story of 16 was very much Clive's story. He was the main focus, and because of that, it fit the genre and gameplay of character action really well, because he was the only character that you were going to use and was really focused on. But because of that, we didn't really get proper development of all of these characters who were all genuinely interesting. I think all of that cast had so much potential to be amazing, but they unfortunately don't really follow up on a lot of them because, again, it's Clive's story. He takes center stage. And I certainly have my issue with 16. I love the combat, I love the music, the voice acting, the writing for the most part I think is really good, but it was really that structure of the story and its pacing that I really was not crazy about. I think we should have spent way more time with younger Clive after he was captured. Let us actually play through all of the horrible horrible stuff Clive has to do from him being a teenager until his, mid-20s or so. Don't just tell us, let us experience that. I also wasn't a big fan of the time skip after, spoiler alert for those of you who haven't played 16, but the time skip that happens after the death of Cid. I wasn't crazy about that. I think we should have lived in that moment, saw how it affected Clive and Jill and everyone at the hideout. Because when you skip that, you skip a really big emotional beat in how it affects the story and the world, and now we're just kind of seeing the aftermath of everything. Cid's legacy kind of looms large over them instead of us actually getting to live in that sadness. But I think, again, with that cycle of Final Fantasy games, I think 5, maybe 10 years down the line, I think you'll have a lot more people who look back at 16 and, again, like Thanos, we're like, perhaps I was a little too harsh towards you. Speaking of what happens with the next Final Fantasy, we have Lowry2009 who says, where does Final Fantasy XVII go after the 7 Remake Trilogy? Followed by Eddie5097 who says, what do you think Final Fantasy XVII is going to look like? Based on pattern, 17 should be an MMO, 11, 14, 17, and if that's the case, then I'd love for it to be in Ivalice because it has established lore, world, jobs, races, everything an MMO needs. Imagine an MMO with both FF12 and tactics-style battles and references to Tactics, 12 and Vagrant story, and more. Add modern tech, and you might have something amazing. So Final Fantasy XVII is definitely a really, really big question mark. Obviously, Square Enix has been going through a ton of restructuring over the past year and a half, so a lot of their development plans have probably changed to a degree. But I would assume that Final Fantasy XVII has most definitely started production. Again, they like to start production on the next mainline Final Fantasy around the time they're about to release their current new one. But I don't know if 17 would follow the pattern of it being an MMO, primarily because Final Fantasy XIV, I know it's going through its own, tumultuous period right now and hasn't been super well received by a lot of people. It's still an incredibly popular, well-established MMO that has so much lore and work put into it, and it still has a really massive player base. I don't know if you would want to be like, hey, we're going to have a new MMO Final Fantasy that is Final Fantasy 17. All that stuff you did in 14, it's gone. You can't migrate it. You got to start over fresh. I don't know if they'd want to do that. It really seems like it'd be a really, really huge gamble that could backfire on them. So with 14 being as established as it is, I don't know if they'd want to risk that and bring out a new MMO Final Fantasy. So we could be looking at 17 being a brand new mainline big Final Fantasy. I think it will have a party system. I think you'll have open world exploration. I'm hoping it will have the combat of the 7 Remake Trilogy. Again, I just think that what they're doing with 7 Remakes Trilogy really should be the blueprint moving forward for future Final Fantasies. Characters, structure, story, world exploration, combat, I think is already really well done in this trilogy, and now it's really just about using that as a foundation moving forward and kind of changing things up and evolving it as you move on from game to game. So that's what I see the next Final Fantasy being, is a party-based JRPG in the vein of some of the older Final Fantasies, but using the combat of the 7 Remake Trilogy. I don't think they're going to go back to doing another character action type Final Fantasy. I personally like that combat, but I don't know if that's something they want to move forward with when they have this really incredible combat system in the Remake Trilogy that kind of takes elements of past Final Fantasy games from 1 through 10 and 12 and 13 and 15 and really kind of does a fantastic job of updating them and modernizing them and implementing all of that stuff like stagger system and the freezing of combat when you go into your menu, all that stuff. It's just so well done. It just makes sense to move forward with that and let a new development studio be like, okay, this is what you guys established. We're going to twist this aspect of it to put our stamp on it. And we will end with a really positive, nice comment from Lump Critter Gravy. Fantastic name. They go on to say, one of my favorite moments in gaming is looking at the grasslands in Rebirth after leaving Calm. That was such a really well done moment in Rebirth. Again, in the original FF7, leaving Midgar and entering the world map and realizing, oh wow, there's way more game to experience was such an incredible, memorable moment for so many people. And I think a lot of us were waiting to see how Rebirth was going to handle that, and I think they did a phenomenal job. Leaving that dark tunnel, being blinded by the the sun. The characters step out and see, oh, everything looks like it's fine, until Red 13 says, yeah, it looks fine on the surface, but deep down, there's some real trouble going on. But then they set you free, and you get to roam around this really cool grasslands environment, fighting different enemies and doing different side quests, and looking out into the ocean. Oh my God, looking into the ocean was so sick. Makes me wonder how they're going to do underwater stuff in part 3, but just seeing it from that perspective and looking back at Calm and looking out into where our adventure is eventually going to take us was so well done. They really knocked it out of the park with that. And with that comes the end of this installment of community comments. Thank you guys for leaving your comments on the thread that I posted. If you want to participate in future community comments videos, keep an eye on my YouTube channel on the post section. I will sometimes post stuff on there just to see how you guys are doing or ask questions, and that's usually where I go for the community posts in that thread to get info from you guys and to have you participate. It's always fun doing these videos because people have some really cool ideas that I definitely don't think about that lead to really fun discussions. And if you made it this far, please make sure to like the video and subscribe. Liking the video really does go a long way. Leaving a comment goes a long way. It just gets the video out into the YouTube algorithm and lets them know, hey, this is pretty good. Maybe other people might want to see it. So with that being said, I am Curious Corduroy. That is the video. Let me know how you guys feel about what we discussed in today's video down in those comments, and I will see you guys in the next one. Please remember to always be excellent to one another.